Hey everyone, today I am going to go around the garden and give all my plants a little bit of TLC today. So everything's obviously showing that it's just a little bit tired and lacking nutrients, so I'm just going to give everything a feed. But I also thought whilst I do that I'd pop the camera on and show you what I use in my garden to feed everything. So I'm trying to obviously be as sustainable as I can and to not waste anything and use what I have on hand as much as possible. So a couple of weeks back I went to the beach and I sourced a small amount of seaweed to make my own seaweed tea as a liquid fertilizer for the garden. So I want to show you what that looks like and how I apply it to the garden. It's been brewing for about 4 weeks now. It will keep brewing. I'll just keep topping it up with water. So rather than just putting it into the watering can and sprinkling it all over my plants and thinking it will be fine, I just thought to be on the safe side I should test it. So last week I diluted it 1 part fertilizer to 10 parts water, and I tested it on 2 plants. I tested it on a tomato plant and I tested it on some lettuce just to see obviously if it's okay to put on the plants, because the last thing I want to do is just sprinkle it around everything in the garden and then everything die. So I thought, right, err on the side of caution and just see how it works out first. So I want to show you the 2 plants that I've tested the seaweed fertilizer on. I want to show you what they look like, and I am pretty chuffed with them. Now the lettuce, this is the lettuce, it did have a little bit of speckles on the leaves to start with anyway. So that hasn't happened from the fertilizer itself, but it hasn't died, and there's no smell off the pot since I've put the fertilizer in here, so that's a plus. And my little tomato is doing great. He looks lovely and he hasn't died, so I'm super chuffed with that. And this is one of my spare ones. I'll just keep feeding it and see what comes off of it. But yeah, really thrilled with that. So yeah, I think this means we're good to go and pop the fertilizer all around the garden. So yeah, there are also 2 other things that I use in the garden that don't cost any money and are beneficial to your garden, and it saves you throwing them away. I find that in a small garden, in a small space that's urban, in an urban setting, it's really difficult to have a composting system. So I've always been intrigued to see what I can do to obviously lower the stuff that I'm throwing out into the general waste and compost bin, but what I could probably add back into my garden without having a composting bin. So there are 2 things that I do for that. The first one is my coffee grinds. So I have a coffee machine and I'm obsessed with coffee. And the little pucks that come off, so obviously I use beans, I grind up the beans and then I obviously put it into the coffee machine, and then the leftover from the espresso coffee obviously goes into this little knock bin. I don't know if that's what it's called, but it goes into this little bin and I actually save it. Now I don't go crazy with this stuff, I only put a little bit on every so often. So one of the main benefits I found by adding compost to the garden, coffee grinds, coffee grinds, it attracts worms. So obviously worms, living soil, they'll obviously break it all down and that's food for them. And they'll obviously, whatever they secrete is what the plants feed off of. So that's the main thing, but they do also have some other things in them like calcium and phosphorus and good source of nitrogen, iron, and a few other minerals that are also good for your garden. But yeah, use it sparingly. I mean, every so often I'll just put in, say in autumn, I'll top dress the buckets and the planters that I have with this, and yeah, just sprinkle it around the garden. I wouldn't use it like weekly or anything like that. I would just say like every couple of months or so, I'll just sprinkle, choose a little area and I'll just sprinkle, break it all down kind of like this, and I'll just sprinkle it on top. But I'll show you what I do with it later. And then the other thing that I've started to really enjoy using in the garden, and I focused mainly on the tomato bed with this last year, is ground up eggshells. So I've just whizzed these up in a food grinding machine and into this little kind of fine powder. I'll just show you inside. And then what I do is I just sprinkle that over the surface of the soil and I just scratch it into the soil. And now the only thing I suppose I should mention about the eggshells is they do take a while to break down in the garden. They can take up to a year. Obviously with grinding them, they do break down a bit quicker, so I anticipate maybe 6 months for the ground eggshells to work. But if you don't have access to like a blender or anything like that, you can simply just crush them in your hand and just put the slightly bigger shells into the garden. They'll take a little bit longer to break down, but they'll still be perfect and do the same job. So like that. The only thing I do with these though is obviously because the eggs are raw, creeping over here, aren't you, darling? I'm waving this around and I've just spun it up in the machine and she is like obsessed with the smell of the egg. So yeah, with the, here she comes, look. You love the smell of those eggs, didn't you? Sit. She thinks I'm going to give her some. With the eggshells, I whiz them in the microwave for like 30 seconds just to sterilise them. You can also do it in the oven, but the microwave is just that little bit more convenient for me, but you can put them into the oven as well, I think like 180 for like 20 minutes, half an hour, but the microwave is just that slight bit easier. And yeah, I'll just sprinkle those over. They'll be great for particularly for tomatoes because they contain calcium carbonate, which is like the best nutrient, obviously if it's taken up first. So I love using this particularly on my tomato plants. With tomatoes, they can suffer with blossom end rot. So inside the eggshells, when they break down, they release a chemical called calcium carbonate. And that is the nutrient that prevents blossom end rot on your tomatoes, which is perfect. So yeah, they're perfect to pop into your tomato beds. They'll really help with increasing the level of calcium that's in your soil, providing obviously that you water your plants adequately and the plant has enough moisture in there to actually uptake the nutrients from the soil. But yeah, a really another good one, and it saves you throwing them out, and it's literally like free nutrients for your soil. So like such an easy one, and it's not messy. Like the other thing as well is like trying to boost the nutrients in the garden in an urban setting is like, it's like hassle free. Like it's just like a few eggshells whizzed up and then you just sprinkle it on your garden. It's perfect. So, and also they can keep pests away. I know some critters and bugs don't actually like eggshells, so it can keep them away. Seemingly it's good defense for slugs as well, but I don't really have any problem with slugs. So yeah. They're my two little top tips, plus the seaweed feed, and I will get on and fertilise the garden. So I'm just over here by my tomatoes, and I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit over the surface of the soil and then scratch it in, and that'll be the eggshells applied. Now obviously it's not going to be there immediately for the plant to use probably for this season, but it's just to give you guys an idea of like how you can use it and how you can apply it. And yeah, it will start breaking down and it will just over time help nourish the soil. Come on, out the way you. As you can tell, Rubu is loving the smell of this. So these were the coffee grinds that I was talking to you about. So most of the acid inside these will have actually been washed out through the espressing process. So There shouldn't be any concern with the acidity level really with this too much, because I'm only going to add a little bit, but just for demonstration purposes I thought I would show you how I would apply it. So I just get like a little handful like that, and I would just sprinkle it around the top of the plant, and that's what I've basically done every couple of months over a different plant, and I did that all through the autumn, and it's been perfect. Like, these have been abundant crops, and I just scratch it in. Now the only thing I would say about coffee grinds is go easy on them, because they can be quite like, they don't let the soil, the water flow down. They can act as a barrier, so just make sure they're fully mixed in, and yeah, there you have it, a little extra boost for the raspberry plant, for the little baby raspberry canes that are going to be coming up. So yeah, so before I go ahead and show you my seaweed fertilizer and feed the rest of the garden, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to top up these potato plants with some compost and farmyard manure. I didn't have enough compost to finish off my potato pots, so I must do that today, because they are bursting with life and they have only about 15 litres of soil, so I do need to top them up full way. But I was in Woodies and I picked up this. I've never used this before. I've normally used their multi-purpose compost, but obviously I'm trying to make the switch to peat-free. So this is fully organic, peat-free vegetable compost. So I'm going to use it on my potatoes. And just in case there's not enough nutrients in this for where I have been used to using peat, obviously in my compost, I am going to top it up with a little bit of farmyard manure to give this mix a little bit of an extra boost, because there is only 6 weeks feed in this mixture. I'm going to put in half and half, because that stuff is just gold. So yeah, we'll do that, and then we'll get on with the rest of the fertilising. So they look much better now, don't they? All topped up to the top. So I'm really pleased with that now. I mean, I definitely should have done it when they were a bit smaller, but hopefully I haven't compromised my potato harvest. And then these are the other ones. So yeah, looking a lot better. Foliage is looking good, and they're lovely and topped up. So I'm super happy with my potatoes now that they're all topped up, and what I'll do now is crack on with the seaweed fertiliser. So I'm really excited to pop that all over the garden, because I feel like everything needs that little boost.
Stand up against the wall, so I can trace you with one fine line. We have become a home that's built of all your poems and mine. Please don't disappear from me. It's not what you think it's gonna be like, but nothing ever is in this life. It's a slow dance in paradise. When the world's on fire, look for my eyes.
So that's the garden fed. I absolutely reek of seaweed feed, because what I ended up doing was rather than using my little scoop thing, I realised that was only enough to do one bucket. So I ended up picking up the whole bucket, tipping it into the watering can, and it's all over me. And the other thing I wanted to say to you before we finish up today is, if you're doing it and watering through your brassica cage, yeah, maybe take the netting back a little bit, because it is all over the cage now, where obviously I haven't sieved it or anything. So word of caution, 2 words of caution when using your own seaweed feeder: mind your clothes and pull back your netting, because otherwise you're going to smell really bad and you're going to have seaweed cooking on the top of your brassica cage when the sunshine comes out. But yeah, thanks so much for hanging out. If you like the video, give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for some more antics in the tiny garden, and I'll catch you up in the next one. Bye everyone.